Dorothea Helen Puente, January 9, 1929, March 27, 2011, was an American convicted serial killer. In the 1980s, Puente ran a boarding house in Sacramento, California and murdered various elderly and mentally disabled boarders before cashing their Social Security checks. Her total count reached 9 confirmed murders and 6 unconfirmed. Newspapers dubbed Puente the Death House Landlady. Background: Puente was born Dorothea Helen Gray on January 9, 1929, in Redlands, California, to Trudy Mae, née Yates, and Jesse James Gray. She had a traumatic upbringing. Her parents were both alcoholics, her mother was a sex worker, and her father attempted suicide in front of her. Her father died of tuberculosis in 1937 when she was 8, and her mother died in a car accident the following year. She was sent to an orphanage, where she was sexually abused. In 1945, Gray was married for the first time, at the age of 16, to a soldier named Fred McFowell, who had just returned from the Pacific Theater of World War II. Gray had 2 daughters between 1946 and 1948, but she sent one to live with relatives in Sacramento and placed the other child for adoption. She became pregnant again in 1948, but suffered a miscarriage. In late 1948, McFowell left her. Gray was sentenced to a year in jail for forging checks. She was paroled after 6 months. Soon afterwards, she became pregnant by a man she barely knew and gave birth to a daughter, whom she placed for adoption. In 1952, she married a Swede named Axel Johansson, and had a turbulent 14-year marriage. In the 1960s, Gray was arrested for owning and managing a brothel and was sentenced to 90 days in the Sacramento County Jail. After her release, she was arrested again, this time for vagrancy, and sentenced to another 90 days in jail. Following that, Gray began a criminal career that over time became more serious. She found work as a nurse's aide, caring for disabled and elderly people in private homes. In a short time, she started to manage boarding houses. Gray divorced Johansson in 1966 and married Roberto Puente, a man 19 years her junior, in Mexico City. The marriage lasted 2 years. Shortly after it ended, Dorothea Puente took over a 3-story, 16-bedroom care home at 2100 F Street in Sacramento. She would later rent an upstairs apartment at 1426 Fahrenheit Street. Puente got married for the 4th time in 1976 to Pedro Montalvo, who was a violent alcoholic. This marriage lasted only a few months. Puente started to spend time in local bars looking for older men who were receiving benefits. Puente forged their signatures to steal their money. She was caught and charged with 34 counts of treasury fraud, for which she received probation. Murders. Puente's reputation at the F Street boarding house was mixed. Some tenants resented her stinginess and complained that she refused to give them their mail or money. Others praised her for small acts of kindness or for her generous homemade meals. Her motives for killing tenants were financial, with police estimates of her ill-gotten income totaling more than $5,000 per month. The murders began shortly after Puente began renting out space in the home at 1426 Fahrenheit Street. In April 1982, 61-year-old Ruth Monroe began living with Puente in her upstairs apartment, but soon died from an overdose of codeine and acetaminophen. Puente told police that the woman was very depressed because her husband was terminally ill. They believed her and ruled the incident as a suicide. A few weeks later, the police were back after a 74-year-old pensioner named Malcolm Mackenzie, one of 4 elderly people Puente was accused drugging and stealing from him. She was convicted of 3 charges of theft on August 18, 1982, and sentenced to 5 years in jail, where she began corresponding with a 77-year-old retiree living in Oregon, named Everson Gilmouth. A pen-pal friendship developed, and when Puente was released in 1985 after serving just 3 years of her sentence, he was waiting for her in a red 1980 Ford pickup. Their relationship developed quickly, and the couple was soon making wedding plans. In November 1985, Puente hired Ismael Flores to install some wood paneling in her apartment. For his labor and an additional $800, Puente gave him a red 1980 Ford pickup in good condition, which she stated belonged to her boyfriend in Los Angeles who no longer needed it. She asked Flores to build a 6x3 by 2-foot box to store books and other items. She then asked Flores to transport the filled, nailed-shut box to a storage depot. Flores agreed, and Puente joined him. On the way, she told him to stop while they were on Garden Highway in Sutter County and dump the box on the riverbank in an unofficial household dumping site. Puente told him the contents of the box were just junk. On January 1, 1986, a fisherman spotted the box sitting about 3 feet from the bank of the river and informed police. Investigators found a badly decomposed and unidentifiable body of an elderly man inside. Puente continued to collect Everson Gilmouth's pension and wrote letters to his family, explaining that the reason he had not contacted them was because he was ill. She maintained a room and board business, taking in 40 new tenants. Gilmouth's body remained unidentified for 3 years. Puente continued to accept elderly tenants and was popular with local social workers because she accepted tough cases, including drug addicts and abusive tenants. She collected tenants' monthly mail before they saw it and paid them stipends, pocketing the rest for expenses. During this period, parole agents went and visited Puente, who had been ordered to stay away from the elderly and refrain from handling government checks, a minimum of 15 times at the residence. No violations were ever noted. Suspicion was first aroused when neighbors noticed the odd activities of a homeless alcoholic known only as Chief, whom Puente stated she had adopted and made her personal handyman. Puente had Chief dig in the basement and cart soil and rubbish away in a wheelbarrow. At the time, the basement floor was covered with a concrete slab. Chief later took down a garage in the backyard and installed a fresh concrete slab there as well. Soon afterward, Chief disappeared. Arrest and imprisonment. On November 11, 1988, police inquired after the disappearance of tenant Alberto Montoya, a developmentally disabled man with schizophrenia whose social worker had reported him missing. After noticing disturbed soil on the property, they uncovered the body of tenant Leona Carpenter, 78. 7 bodies were eventually found on the property. Puente was charged with a total of 9 murders. Puente's boyfriend, Everson Gilmouth, 77, and 8 tenants who lived at the boarding house, Ruth Monroe, 61, Leona Carpenter, 78, Alvaro Bert Alberto Gonzalez Montoya, 51, Dorothea Miller, 64, Benjamin Fink, 55, James Gallup, 62, Vera Faye Martin, 64, and Betty Palmer, 78. She was convicted of 3 murders and sentenced to 2 life sentences. She served life without parole, and she passed away in 2011 of natural causes. During the initial investigation, Puente was not immediately a suspect, and she was allowed to leave the property, ostensibly to buy a cup of coffee at a nearby hotel. Instead, after buying the coffee, she fled immediately to Los Angeles, where she befriended an elderly pensioner whom she had met in a bar. The pensioner, however, recognized her from police reports on television and called the authorities. Her trial was moved to Monterey County, California, on a change of venue motion filed by her attorneys, Kevin Climo and Peter Vladin III. The trial began in October 1992 and ended a year later. The prosecutor, John O'Mara, was the homicide supervisor in the Sacramento County District Attorney's Office. O'Mara called over 130 witnesses. He argued to the jury that she had used sleeping pills to put her tenants to sleep, then suffocated them, and hired convicts to dig the holes in her yard. Climo concluded his closing argument by showing a picture commonly used in psychology that can be viewed in different ways and saying, "Keep in mind things are not always as they seem." The jury deliberated over a month and found Puente guilty of 3 murders. The jury was deadlocked 11-1 for conviction on all counts, and the lone holdout finally agreed to a conviction of 2 first-degree murder counts including special circumstances, and 1 second-degree murder count. The penalty phase of the prosecution was highlighted by her prior convictions introduced by Omar. The defense called several witnesses that showed Puente had a generous and caring side to her. Witnesses, including her long-lost daughter, testified how Puente had helped them in their youth and guided them to successful careers. Mental health experts testified of Puente's abusive upbringing and how it motivated her to help the less fortunate. At the same time, they agreed she had an evil side brought on by the stress of caring for her down-and-out tenants. Omar's closing argument focused on Puente's acts of murder. Does anyone become responsible for their conduct in this world? These people were human beings. They had a right to live. They did not have a lot of possessions, no houses, no cars, only their social security checks and their lives. She took it all. Death is the only appropriate penalty. Climo responded by evoking Dorothea, the child and caregiver. Peter Vlotin addressed the jurors in confidential tones, contrasting with Omar's shouting. "We are here today to determine one thing: what is the value of Dorothea Puente's life? That is the question. Does she have to be killed?" Vlotin spoke gently about Puente's childhood, touching on the dramatic aspects that shaped her life and urged the jurors to see the world through her eyes. "You have heard of the despair which was the foundation of her life, the anger and resentment. If anyone in the jury room tells you it was not that bad, ask them, would you want that to happen to yourself? Would you want that to happen to your children? I am led to believe if there is any reason for us to be living here on this earth, it is to somehow enhance one another's humanity, to love, to touch each other with kindness, to know that you have made just one person breathe easier because you have lived. I submit to you, ladies and gentlemen, that is why these people came to testify for Dorothea Puente. I think you can only truly understand why so many people testified and asked you to spare Dorothea's life only if you have ever fallen down and stumbled on the road of life and had someone pick you up, give you comfort, give you love, show you the way. Then you will understand why these people believe Dorothea's life is worth saving. That is mitigating. That is a human quality that deserves to be preserved. It is a flame of humanity that has burned inside Dorothea since she was young. That is reason to give Dorothea Puente life without the possibility of parole." Conviction. She was convicted of 3 of the murders, though the jury could not agree on the other 6. After several days of deliberations, the jury was deadlocked 7-5 for life. The judge, Michael J. Verga, declared a mistrial when the jury said further deliberations would not change their minds. Under the law, Puente received life without the possibility of parole. She was incarcerated at Central California Women's Facility, CCWF, in Chowchilla, California. For the rest of her life, she maintained her innocence, insisting that all her tenants had died of natural causes. Death. She died on March 27, 2011 in prison in Chowchilla at the age of 82 from natural causes. Media. Puente has been featured on numerous true crime television shows including Crime Stories, Deadly Women, A Stranger in My Home and World's Most Evil Killers. The 1990 film Evil Spirits starring Karen Black is loosely based on the Dorothea Puente murders. In 1998, she began corresponding with Shane Bugbee. The result was Cooking with a Serial Killer, 2004, which included a lengthy interview, almost 50 recipes, and various pieces of prison art sent to Bugbee by the convicted murderer. Jodi Picoult mentions Puente's crimes and cookbook in her novel House Rules. The house at 1426 F Street was included in the 2013 home tour held by the Sacramento Old City Association. It was then the subject of the 2015 documentary short The House is Innocent and was again opened to tours for one day in conjunction with a local film festival's showing of the film. In 2015, the Ghost Adventures crew investigated the house due to reports of hauntings by the victims and Puente herself. In April 2020, the house and current owners were showcased in the Kibi series Murder House Flip. In June 2020, the house was featured in a 10-minute documentary with 60-second docs about the purchase and renovation of the house by the current owners. See also List of serial killers in the United States. References. Further reading. Blackburn, Daniel J. 1990. Human Harvest, The Sacramento Murder Story. New York, Knightsbridge Pub Company. ISBN 1-87796-10-8. Norton, Carla, 1994. Disturbed Ground, The True Story of a Diabolical Female Serial Killer. New York, W. Morrow and Company. ISBN 0-688-09704-9. Wood, William P. 2004. The Bone Garden, The Sacramento Boarding House Murders. New York, iBooks. ISBN 0-7434-8693-5. Bugbee, Shane, 2004. Cooking with a Serial Killer. Recipes from Dorothea Puente. Raleigh, NC. Lulu.com. ISBN 1-4116-1544-1. Stone, Michael H., M.D. and Brucato, Gary, Ph.D., The New Evil, Understanding the Emergence of Modern Violent Crime, Amherst, N.Y. Prometheus Books, pages 104-107. ISBN 978-163388-5325. External links, No Cause Determined in Deaths of Boarders. The New York Times. Associated Press. July 19, 1989. Retrieved February 4, 2017. Crown News Center 4. November 13, 88. Part 1 of 2 on YouTube. Crown TV News report about the initial investigation.